Welcome to The Gap, where it's our mission to bridge the gap between training and on-field performance.
I'm Brett Hart, owner of Hitman Performance.
And I'm Dan Labadia, the owner of Jack Javelin.
Hope you guys enjoy the show. Welcome back, everyone, to this episode of The Gap. Today, we have a two-timer podcast legend, Luke Dawson, a.k.a. ThrowChed on Instagram. We had a great conversation with him almost a year ago now, I'm pretty sure. And if you never heard about that one, you should definitely go check it out. But we're excited to have Luke on today, talking a little bit about pitching development, long-term athletic development, and overall, how to just throw a baseball pretty hard. Luke, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back on, guys. Excited to be here and chat a little bit more.
Luke, we were talking about Yamamoto and his evolution of his training, definitely unconventional to standard strength and conditioning training, also using a turbo javelin as well. And I'm sure you've dabbled with the javelin yourself. Talk a little bit about that and how you've seen it transfer to your throwing and to your development, and give a little insight on Yamamoto's training as well.
You know, going into different implements, and, you know, Dan and I threw the javelin one time. That was like my main experience with the javelin. And, you know, it's going to challenge you. And I found that in anything that you're doing, whether that's throwing different implements, whether that's doing different types of workouts, just figuring out how to keep your body and your brain guessing and learning new things, like new skill acquisition, that's when I've always seen myself make some really good jumps in velocity, in command, and just like overall general athleticism. So that could be learning how to throw the javelin or learning how to throw the football better. That's something I sucked at throwing a football growing up. And I learned over years and years and years how to throw the football. And I think that helped me out a lot. I used to, the green ball, like the 2-pound plyo ball, that used to kill my elbow to throw. And I was like, I should probably figure out how to throw this. So I started throwing it a little bit more, and I learned kind of how to leverage like my pec a little bit more, the front of my shoulder, and really open up that range of motion and use that. So javelin is the same way. And that's where, you know, a lot of mobility stuff went into, and I had never really explored a lot of that stuff. And when I started seeing the mobility stuff, I was like, oh, this could be really, really good. And you start to learn these new movements, and they're extremely challenging at first, both physically and mentally. But the better you can do with that and learn from it, then it's going to carry over to, you know, the main goal of what you're working towards.
So in terms of the mobility, because we were just talking about this before, and there's a lot on social media that all these different mobility exercises to do and different ranges of motion to explore. How do you know which ones to actually prescribe to a client or to yourself that actually have the most return on investment, instead of just hammering 3 hours a day on random mobility exercises that might not actually transfer to the goal that you actually want?
Yeah, so generally we're going to take our athletes through a basic movement screen. So seeing how their body is moving, just standing around, or, you know, passively on the table potentially as well. And then I'm also going to look at their throwing and kind of compare those two things, because sometimes you'll watch a guy throw and you'll be like, oh, this guy really struggles to rotate. But then you see them, you know, whether it's in their warm up or in an actual movement screen, and they're just doing a certain movement, like a thoracic rotation. And it's like, oh, this person actually rotates really well. That's probably more of a mechanical thing. But then someone else who you do their screen and they are struggling to actually rotate, then it's like, okay, we need to work to open up that range of motion and train it a little bit better, so that then they can express that in their actual throwing.
How do you go about the test and retest? Is it straight velo? Do you go on spin rate? Do you go off feel? Like, is there a more biomechanical led approach towards that, or is it more of a communication piece with the athlete saying, oh, that felt a lot better?
Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of those things are going to take some time generally. You know, if warming up properly, obviously is going to have more of that immediate impact, but ideally we want to have those adaptations carry over, you know, from day to day, and hopefully you find that better movement on a consistent basis instead of having to like hammer all this mobility stuff all the time. But yeah, just looking at at the end of the day, we're trying to improve their mechanics a lot of times, and the mobility is going to factor into that. So looking at, okay, are their mechanics actually improving as their mobility improves? And a lot of times those things are going to layer together. Sometimes you'll improve someone's mobility and right away it clicks in their throw. Sometimes we might improve their range of motion mobility and then we still have to cue some things up because they just kind of go back into that old pattern. But having that better range of motion and control over those ranges of motion allows us to explore a lot more things on the mechanical side. But if they're super locked up in a certain area, then me trying to make a mechanical change is just going to be like we're butting heads and things aren't going to work because they physically can't move in the way we want them to.
I made a post based off my Yamamoto podcast that Brett and I did together, talking about how he uses the turbo javelin in his training and how it takes away from the stress of the elbow. And I made a point that I put up on Instagram saying how the javelin, I believe, is harder on the elbow because not only do you have a 30-meter running component into the javelin throw where your legs are really involved, but it's an 8-foot-long carbon fiber or steel spear where you have to throw through the point. Any deviation around throwing it perfectly straight, you're going to light up your arm. So with a baseball, you could throw overhand, sidearm, submarine, and pretty much find what works for you. The javelin's not like that. There's a lot of people in the comment section that said it doesn't matter because the baseball being lighter has the arm move at higher velocities, and that's what translates more to elbow damage, and also just because of the sheer volume of baseball pitches thrown in a game. But you mentioned how even the 1 kilogram ball bothered your elbow. So what's your take on that? Why do you think that the 1 kilogram ball bothered your elbow? Is it a weight thing or is it a speed thing? And which one translates to, essentially hurting the arm more?
Yeah, and definitely seen a lot of that research that shows like a lighter ball and higher arm speed is going to be a lot more stress on the arm. But there is going to be a lot more stress as well in that layback phase with like a heavier implement. You're like really cranking into that movement. But then, in the acceleration phase with a lighter ball and you're moving faster, like that potentially is going to be a lot more dangerous on the elbow. I think, and for myself, but also talking to a lot of different athletes and throwers, everyone has like ball weight or implements that feel better than others. So for me, growing up throwing a wiffle ball or a tennis ball a lot at home, I always have felt a lot more comfortable throwing a lighter implement. And so like, I think it was in the spring, like I was just messing around and I pulled down a wiffle ball and I pulled it down like 112. And so it's like by far the fastest I've ever thrown anything by like, I think I pulled down like 3-ounce ball, like 105 one time. So like by far faster than that. But that always felt the best to me. Whereas like the green plyo ball, the 2-pound, 1 gram or kilogram, 1 kilogram.
1 kilogram.
Yeah. So that always felt more stressful to me. But I think, I'm a little bit like tighter wound. I know like my forearm's tight. I've had some like forearm strains in the past. So for me, when I got a heavier ball in my hand, I kind of just tensed up, I think, a lot of times, and I would like grip the ball a lot tighter. So for me, figuring out how to stay a little bit more relaxed on that ball, for me, instead of holding it with like 2 fingers like a baseball, I started holding it kind of like full palm. Mm-hmm. And now it feels great. Like now I kind of can rip that. I know we did that, a few months ago when you were down at the facility. So I think you can learn a lot from that and figuring out the different ways that you can throw a different type of implement is going to help you just get better at throwing the same way throwing a med ball would, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too that a lot of what you talked about was that layback position, and having a heavier implement helps you get into it. And that's what I've always talked about with plyo balls, is it actually helps javelin throwers find that layback position, because instead of the 800 grams being spread apart over 8 feet, it's now all in the palm of your hand. And like you said, you made that change with your grip. That's how we hold them as well, because we want to have the athlete feel that supination in their wrist and feel like we're, when we hold a javelin, it's down the palm. So when we hold the plyo ball, it's in the palm as well. So what are some of those things that you guys use to train layback? Because that's like a big thing for me is I will teach my athletes how to get into that layback and external rotation position by using those heavier plyo balls.
Yeah, so one of those things in the movement screen that generally I'm going to take guys through is looking at their passive and active shoulder rotation. So a lot of times either put them on the table or put them in like a quadruped position down on all fours and testing like where they can get into external rotation. Obviously there's going to, if we're not pinning them down on the table, then there's going to be a couple different things factoring in, not just shoulder rotation. But you get a really good idea of how far back they can get actively. And then for the vast majority of guys, they have a lot more passive range. And, most guys, if you can throw a ball pretty well, like you're probably laying back pretty well. But we want to be able to gain as much active range as we can. So for some guys, for a lot of guys, either they're very weak in that range or they're very tight, and that's why they can't get there. So first, being able to go through some soft tissue stuff, whether that's getting them on like the therapy team schedule, getting them some like needling or, manual therapy done, using lacrosse ball to get in there, loosen up different areas, pec, back of the shoulder, like all over there. That's going to then allow them to gain a little bit more range of motion. And then from there, we can work to actively strengthen that, right? So we'll do a lot of shoulder rotation work. So in the quadruped is one of my favorite ones where we can just work into external rotation with a dumbbell or just body weight to start. If they still can't get back there, then we're going to assist them a little bit further back and have them eccentrically control that position. And then there's a few different ways that we can get into that. So we'll do like a kneeling assisted on the bench. So or on the wall, getting the elbow up in line with the shoulder, and then again, holding like a dumbbell and letting that dumbbell kind of assist you into some external rotation, holding that position and then coming back up. Little things like that are going to kind of ease into that position with some load. And then we can start to gain a little bit more active control there. And then, going into your throwing, you're already going to be fine in that position likely.
With throwing, we talked about this with Jake yesterday. And something that I've noticed is kids are selling out a lot more for just pure velo. So I love the quote saying that injuries occur when your skill level exceeds your level of preparation. How important is it for you to instill to your clients and your younger kids that this velo takes time to actually get and to be able to replicate it over and over again while still maintaining some safety in the elbow and the shoulder?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of different layers to that. Being able to build that good foundation of strength, mobility, of size, those are going to be like the ground level for that. But then it's very tough, especially right now with how college recruiting is. Colleges are not really taking many high school guys. You have to be like really, really above and beyond, especially if you want to go play at a high level, like power conference school. Like you have to really be standing out. So all these guys, and velocity is a big part of that, right? So if a college sees you and, you're throwing 90 miles an hour, like that's very likely not going to cut it for a lot of Division I schools anymore. If you're a senior throwing 90, if you're a sophomore throwing 90, like they're going to see that, potential progression there and offer you off that. But if you're still throwing 90 in 2 years as a senior, like they might pull the offer that they have for you because they don't see that progression that they want. They don't see you helping their program the next year, which is what they're really looking at the end of the day. So being able to remind kids, like, I know you're potentially not getting the offers that you're looking for right now, but again, you do need to be like realistic. And if your goal is to go play at a really, really high level school, then potentially you do need to go to a JUCO or go to a D2 or a D3 first, and then transfer to that school if you develop the way you see yourself and you want to. And I know through my experience, like I did not develop in high school like the way I probably could have. It took me until, you know, my freshman, sophomore year of college to like really make some of those bigger jumps in velocity. But I kind of use that as a reminder to guys, but it is very tough to, you know, get kids to understand that. And, you know, everyone wants to go play at, you know, a super high level school and, you know, play in front of a ton of fans and have a scholarship and then go play professional ball. But, you know, that's not going to be the outcome for all guys. And if you want to go play professionally, there are a lot of different routes. You know, it's not just go to this like huge power conference school. There's a lot of different routes to it.
That's just something I was talking about with one of my buddies who's in professional baseball. I won't say the organization that he's in, but something that I thought was very wild was he was a fantastic pitcher. So he is very good at getting outs, hitting his spots. The act of pitching was what he was really good at. And what he was told was, we don't really care like how productive you are, how many strikeouts or outs you get, or your ERA. It's your velo average. It's like, are you hitting a certain velo average every game? And he posed the question, so if I can throw 3 innings, no hits, no runs, but average 87 versus 5 hits, 3 earned runs, a couple walks, but I'm hitting 92, like that's going to be more beneficial. And they told him, yeah. It's like the act of pitching, I feel like, is almost getting washed away. I don't know if you feel the same way, but the conversations I've had with some of these guys in the higher ups is just they're looking for more throwers versus pitchers. I don't know if you've had that thought as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I know I chased that at a certain point in my career, and to some extent I still do, because it is important. And, you know, if you look at an MLB organization, they know what's successful at the big league level. And yeah, like 87 and 90 generally is not going to be successful anymore at the big league level. That's why you basically see no one doing that. And if they are, then they're throwing from like a really funky arm slot probably. Even, you know, in the 90 to 94 range, like you have to be really, really good at a lot of different things. You have to have, you know, your fastball has to be outlier in terms of probably some type of movement, how you hide the ball, your arm slot, and then your off speed has to be really, really, really good as well. You have to be able to command it. So all of those things are going to factor in, but like you have to look at what is your goal. So for some guys, their goal is, I want to play in college and I want to be successful in college. Well, you probably don't need to throw 98 miles an hour then. You need to like focus on, becoming like the best for whatever level you are. But if you're in college and you're looking to play at the professional level, then you definitely need to probably gain some velocity. Yeah, you might, if you have like a sub 2 ERA in every place you go, like eventually they'll keep moving you up. But that's a long process, and you probably have to make it to like the highest level of college or independent ball before you get picked up. And then you're going to have to post that same really, really good stat line year after year after year if you want to make it to the big leagues. And that's, in a lot of senses, tougher to do than, you know, someone who's just throwing the shit out of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, the consistency piece definitely is harder to replicate, especially when you're against the 8-ball a little bit. You don't have the velo or even just the physical proportions to throw hard. It's like a 6'4" guy's going to have more of a capacity to throw a lot harder than someone who's 5'7". Like, that's just the reality of the situation. That's why most of the greatest pitchers tend to be on the taller side. For the kids that aren't as genetically gifted, what role does strength and conditioning and nutrition play to even give them a fighting shot to play college or maybe potentially professional down the road?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge, obviously. You know, whether it's, you look at all small guys who throw hard, number one thing is like their mechanics are going to be very, very good. So you need to be super efficient with your body. And I would also say, yeah, definitely size in terms of like body weight, strength, mobility, those, and general athleticism. All those things are going to be pretty damn important as well. But you do see some guys who are outliers there. You know, you look at someone like Yamamoto, obviously, and, you know, not like the biggest guy in terms of body weight. Strength-wise, he's probably not going to like lift a ton of weight in the weight room, but very strong in certain ways, right? Strong through like ranges of motion, strong using like his body weight. There's a lot of different ways that you can be strong. And I mean, general athleticism, I'm sure he's like very, very good. And you see him throw like the javelin and he can kind of launch that thing as well. So those pieces are going to be super, super important for those guys who are undersized. And yeah, I mean, it's going to be harder for those guys, but you know, and there is hope because you do see some guys do it, but I would never like sugarcoat it to an athlete and like lie to them and be like, yeah, you're definitely going to do this and it's going to be easy, because it's definitely not. But if it's something you want to do, then, you know, go after it and attack it. And you're going to have to try a lot of different things out and get really, really good at pitching as well. Because going off like your last question, it's even if you throw 100 miles an hour at a certain level, you're going to have to get guys out. And, you know, if you throw 100 miles an hour and you get to the big leagues and you post 6 ERA, you're not going to have a job. Like, you might have a job in AAA or somewhere, but you won't have a job in the big leagues because no one's lasting in the big leagues for, you know, more than a few weeks if they can't get guys out.
In my Yamamoto podcast with Brett, we were talking about how one of the statistics I pulled up with the Tommy John surgery was that athletes that go from, say, 93 to 95 in an off season aren't as likely to get hurt as the guy who goes from 89 to 95 in an off season. So those big velocity improvements over a short period of time are more likely to cause injury. In your mind, why is that, and what do you do to help prevent those kids that are rapidly improving from getting injured?
Yeah, I mean, your body is probably just not fully prepared, or your arm is not fully prepared to handle that, you know, velocity of throwing. And then I think another thing is the velocity, but also the volume of like high velocity throws is what really gets baseball players a lot. You know, javelin's going to be a lot different. You're not going to be throwing nearly as much, you know, number of throws, especially those competitive throws. But, you know, if you're a high school guy and you have a big jump in velocity, you know, let's say maybe you go from, you know, 82 to 90 in an off season, you're probably going to be one of the best pitchers on your high school team, and your high school coach is going to throw you a lot because you're probably going to be a good pitcher, and, you know, they're trying to win games. So out of nowhere, like, you have this extreme, like, higher velocity, and your body's not probably ready to handle that. And then on top of that, you know, in baseball, guys are abusing ibuprofen, or they just maybe have that like dog mentality, and it's like, my coach and my team need me right here. No matter how I feel, I'm going to go out there and pitch. And then that's when you start to run into a lot of those more major injuries I've seen, is like when you kind of ignore a lot of those other signs that are popping up. So that's going to be a big reason. And then, you know, how do we work to mitigate that is, number one, like making sure that their workload is going to be, you know, sustainable for them. Hopefully having some type of communication with the athlete, if we need to, with their coach, understanding like what they can do. And then I think a big thing is being able to continue working out in season. You know, in season, if you go into the season and you throw first game and you throw like 80 pitches, and then you're not working on your mobility, you're not staying on top of your arm care, all of these things, maybe your nutrition, your sleep is lacking, all those things are going to cause like your body to deteriorate and then just throw more stress into the arm. So being able to stay on top of your movement stuff, your strength stuff during the season, I've always found, especially with, you know, the high school guys, is going to be super important in preventing injuries. And yeah, I think a proper build-up as well. I see it in high school, of course, but a big thing in professional baseball is like most guys who blow out their elbows or shoulders too, but like elbows for sure, you'll see are in spring training or like that first month of the year. And that's because I think still a lot of guys don't know how to build up and prepare themselves for the season. So some guys, they really struggle to throw hard in bullpens in the off season. So maybe they're throwing 90 to 92 in a bullpen, and then they go to spring training and, you know, they're facing a hitter, they're in a game, they're outside on a dirt mound, weather's nice, and now all of a sudden maybe they're throwing 96 or 97, which I've seen guys do. And it's like, you just jumped 5 miles an hour and you're not even prepared for that. You haven't done that. And now you're probably throwing, you know, a couple innings like that. Whereas before you just threw like a 25 pitch bullpen at 90 to 92. That's the amount of workload is insane that jump happens. And I always compare it to like running because kind of everyone can relate to that. But if you haven't really ran much, or maybe you've just like jogged a little bit and then you go out and run like 10 miles, like you're going to be pretty cooked the next day. You might hurt yourself, number one, but like at the very least, you're going to be very, very sore the next day. And it's probably going to take you a while to recover.
You know what's funny about that is that I was listening to the Mind Pump podcast, and they were one of my first inspirations to want to have a strength and conditioning or training podcast one day. And they talk more in terms of Gen Pop, but he was saying the same thing about running, where adults just don't practice the skill of running for so long, and then they find themselves like 20 pounds, 30 pounds overweight, and then they're like, oh, I'm going to go for a run. And then it's just so much stress on their joints, and they haven't practiced the skill of actually running, and their technique is terrible, and they don't know actually how to do it or how to breathe when they're doing it or how to have the load management or ramp up properly. And he compared it to going in a tanning booth or going outside and trying to get a tan. If you're trying to get tan for the summertime, you're not going to go outside and bake for 8 hours or whatever, or you're not going to go into the tanning booth and just first day crank it up all the way and sit in there for an hour. Like, you're going to incrementally try to get a little bit more tan each day, and that way you avoid the sunburn. And I think that so many people see that. Obviously, it makes sense when you think about it from that perspective, but then people don't look at it from the physical preparation side as much in terms of sports performance. And regardless of the plan you have, like, you could have the perfect plan and execute it perfectly. One thing I've heard baseball coaches and pitching coaches talk about over and over and over again is when they have a perfect plan for their athletes to ramp up properly, and then what happens is they'll get hot in the bullpen and then they get shut down. And then the next day they get hot again and then they get shut down. And then the third day, on paper, they're quote unquote fresh, but they actually just ramped up and got warm in the bullpen 2 days in a row. So now that third day, when they ramp up again and then go into the game, they're actually a lot more cooked than the coach might realize or the manager might realize, because they don't actually a lot of times look at the physical toll that happens. A lot of times managers, I think, are focused more on like the strategy of the game. So talk a little bit about that and how guys can train to either adapt for that or to be able to recover from that and perform on that third day.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that is preparation throughout your off season, or, you know, whatever your training might look like. Because I think, yeah, a lot of people don't factor in, you know, how many throws a pitcher might be making on a certain day. Because let's say a guy is making 50 pitches in a game, you know, he's throwing maybe 3 innings, 50 pitches, and you want to build him up to that. So maybe you're going to throw a bullpen where, you know, or live ABs and whatnot, and they're throwing close to that many pitches. But, you know, on a game day, maybe you're throwing a lot more pitches. You know, in warm-ups, you're throwing pitches in between innings. You know, if you're a high school guy and you play 2 ways, you're probably throwing, you know, your warm-ups, you're throwing at your position during practice, in between innings again. So there's a lot more throws that go into it than most people think. So kind of keeping that in mind and saying like, okay, I do my 25 pitch bullpen that I throw throughout the offseason is probably not getting me ready for even 25 pitches in a game potentially, because it is so different. So thinking about how much do I actually throw, and I see this with position players all the time. I saw it in college because you take so many reps of ground balls, especially infielders, and a lot of times they're throwing them across the infield to first base. So pitchers, yeah, we have this like, okay, we're going to build up throughout the offseason. A lot of our position players would just, they'd maybe play throughout the summer, but they wouldn't be like practicing the same way. And then it's like, okay, you show up for the first day of fall and you just took 200 ground balls and you threw 200 balls over to first base at like a decent effort. And then 3 days into the fall, all these infielders are like, oh, my arm is like hanging. And it's like, yeah, no shit. You just threw like 10x the amount of throws that you were making throughout the summer. So yeah, just really thinking about the overall volume and workload that, someone is going to face in their season, and doing everything we can in the off season to prepare for that. And one of the things that is also, I think, important is throwing some of those higher velocities. So maybe for some guys that is like working into live ABs. For other guys, that's doing some pull downs, right? Because if pull down is the only way you can expose yourself to a lot higher velocity, then you need to do some of those, because if you're going to throw 100 miles per hour in a game, but your bullpens are only 94, then it's like, maybe we need to get you pulling down more so that you feel like 98, 99, 100 more often in the off season. And then when you start to do that in a game, you're like, okay, my body's like ready for this. It's almost like a test. Like, can you do this? Okay, you can. Now you're ready to go out and like actually perform.
Baseball is definitely a volume game. I think it is overemphasized the amount of reps people need to do in order to feel prepared. Whereas I think of it as the catcher side of things. I was the catcher.
Catcher for sure.
Yeah. Well, like catchers get just shafted. We don't get our swings. We got to do all these bullpens. The worst thing I hated the most was the pitchers that were always the one more guys that always wanted one more, or like, let me get one more. One more turns into 15 to 20 plus, like almost every time. So how do we go about making these reps that you're saying more intentional, so they actually get the result that you want, and it's ingraining that movement pattern and you're actually feeling like you're getting something out of it, versus the 200 reps at practice day one? It's like, does infielder really need 200 reps in a row in an hour-long practice in order to get the result they want? Or do they need more high-level, high-intent reps in order to get that result while also saving their arm without having to do all the extra stuff?
Yeah, I think that a lot of reps is really, really important, but they do definitely, need to be focused and intentional. I think one of the biggest differentiators, especially I see it in my youth guys because I'm trying to get them more reps, but it's like, if you're on a youth team, maybe you practice 2 or 3 times a week, you have a couple games, so maybe you're doing stuff 4 times a week. Then you go to college, and I saw guys get so much better when they went to college, because now you're doing stuff 6 days a week, and it's higher reps, you're longer practices, you're playing more often. And when you factor that in at the youth level, right, why do good players a lot of times get like so much better? They're on better teams, right? They're on the all-star team in the summer. I know, like, for my all-star team, my little league, we all got a lot better because once you made that team, instead of practicing twice a week and then playing twice a week, basically, you were now practicing every single day, and we were longer practices. We were like doing a lot more. So like those guys start to get like exponentially better, while those kids that didn't make that team are probably just like doing the same thing. But in terms of, yes, like focused intentional reps, that's going to be super, super important. So like if I'm having a guy do a bullpen, one of my biggest things is we want to get that generally as close to a game as we can. So at the beginning we might be working on some mechanical stuff, and then we'll work up the mound, and maybe we're still like working a little bit mechanics on the mound. It depends on who they are, but at the end, pretty much always we're going to bring it back to, am I going to trying to like simulate batters somehow? Am I going to compete like and track what I'm doing? There needs to be something at the end there where it's like, all right, we're going to simulate an inning right here. And it's actually going to put a little bit of pressure on you to now just like execute a pitch where you need it to be, throw a strike if you get to, a 2 or 3 ball count. Those are the things you're going to need to do in the game. So let's start to practice that. Maybe we'll put the batter dummy in, right? And that's when, before the season, we want guys to work into live AB reps before, the actual season, because I don't want their scrimmage to be the first time they're facing an actual batter. Right, so like those things are going to start to bring more attention to it. If you are just throwing a bullpen to throw a bullpen, or like that one more, and you're searching for that perfect thing, maybe sometimes it does need to be like, no, you're done. Like you got your 3 batters, and you walk that last guy, but like you're done, because like in a game you might be done, right? Like coach might be coming to take you out. So start to put that pressure on yourself in your practice.
That's huge. I think that is something that a lot of kids are missing, just because working in baseball facilities, I see kids go out and hit. Like, I'm in the strength side. I'm not anywhere near that baseball side of things, but I just watch, and a lot of kids just swing to say they swing. Like, doing a bucket of baseballs and hitting off the tee. Like, are you getting better, or are you just saying that you're just putting more work in than someone else? Like, how do we know you're intentful with every rep? How do we get that more game-like speed? And I think there's times and places to have those dedicated areas where you're just doing tee work, or you're just doing flat ground stuff to get the feel stuff. But I think that could also turn into just an overload volume side of things that they're throwing year round, and they get so stressed out about too, just because that's what they're doing all the time. Like, do you see an approach where maybe putting the bat down and putting the ball down could be beneficial, and maybe trying something else, trying to play a different sport or solve a different movement problem, other than just focusing solely on, I need more reps, I need more volume, I need to do this thing perfectly every time?
Yeah, I think it's going to be very athlete dependent. Some guys have that drive, and it's like they're focused every single time. They're like, I'm thinking of youth athletes mostly, but they're attacking like a certain thing. They have like focused reps that they're actually doing, whereas some guys, they might be like forced into going to this practice and their head's not really in it, and then they can like burn out. Maybe they want to be doing something else that could be super productive, right, in terms of athletic development, or maybe they're interested in something to school and they should be doing that more. I know that when I was younger, like I was good at baseball, and I would love going to my games. I enjoyed practicing, but outside of like my team stuff, I didn't do a ton. But I would play like wiffle ball and stuff with my brother all the time. Like, we would always be having stuff going on at home. But there would be times when like my brother or my dad would be like, oh, do you want to go like hit, or do you want to go throw? And a lot of times like I just didn't want to, but they weren't like pressuring me into doing that. And then when I got, my senior year of high school, and then definitely into college, like I started to recognize the potential I had. I kind of started to develop that drive that I wanted to get better. But I think if I was forced into that when I was younger, potentially I would have kind of burned out. But I had like other activities that I enjoyed and I would rather do sometimes than, go hit a baseball. Now, like that's kind of all I want to do. But it took a little bit of time for that to develop, and it was kind of like the inner, that inner development instead of it being forced from other people.
On our last episode together, you talked about how lefties aren't exposed to those infield throws because they never play on the left side of the diamond and throw across their body like right-handed throwers do. So with that being said, of having that infield movement translate well to just the overall athleticism of being a good thrower. And then we also see people use long toss programs to also increase their pitching and their velocity. Which one do you see more effective to translate to pitching?
between like infield throws and long toss?
Yeah.
I think they can both be effective. And I think, exposing guys to different things is important. We were actually talking about this with a couple of our pro guys at the facility this morning. One of our guys, he's, got drafted out of high school pretty high, and he was talking about how he didn't even really pitch a ton until he was like 13. But he was always an infielder growing up, and he would take a lot of reps as an infielder. And then he started to like throw hard and became a pitcher. And that's when he started to, a lot of that carried over. He got good at throwing. And this goes back to like, are guys like throwers or are they pitchers? And it's like, you need to have that pretty good base as like a thrower. And that's why like exposing guys to different sports, different positions can be super effective. And, long toss in itself is a type of constraint, the same way an infield throw is a constraint. You have these set parameters and you have a task. Whereas like the infield throw might be like you have to throw on the run and get rid of it. Whereas long toss is like you have to throw the ball as far and as hard as you can. And there's going to be a lot that goes into that. Can I backspin the ball well? That's going to make it carry further. Obviously, if I throw it harder, it's probably going to go further. What like trajectory am I throwing it at? Am I shuffling into it? Am I, throwing long toss from like a stretch position? There's a lot of different ways that you can long toss as well. So all those are going to be, effective ways to, create an adaptation.
Would you say that you want to mimic those pitching sessions indoors, whether it's live ABs or bullpens? Would you want to simulate the game as much as possible?
In certain settings, there's definitely time for the mechanical work, the off-speed work. Am I commanding in this setting? Am I doing plyo ball work? There's definitely a time for that. But as you get closer to the season, it is very much your goal shifts. Like your goal is not now like gain more velocity or learn a new off-speed pitch. It's going to be, what do I have to do when I get into my game to get 3 outs in this inning and put up a 0 so my team can, win the game?
What does that actually look like, that process of learning a new off-speed pitch? Because I know that there's certain people that, they got the 2-seam, the 4-seam, the curveball, but then what goes into learning the slider, knuckleball, curveball, stuff like that, and what allows people to have so many different options versus some people that might only be good at 2 or 3?
Yeah, I think at the younger level, so for a youth guy, maybe a 12, 13-year-old, teaching him some basic things, getting to understand how the ball spins out of his hand. Is he throwing a fastball that backspins? Is he throwing more of a 2-seam, a sinker that has some side spin? Learning how a changeup needs to spin, how a slider or a curveball might need to spin, and where he needs to position his hand and his fingers at release of the ball. And just having that understanding of the spin of the pitch is going to impact the movement. And then from there, finding comfortable grip and something that they can throw consistently. Someone might throw a pitch that moves a ton or is really nasty, but if they're not able to command that in a game, then that's not going to be super effective. With our higher level guys, a lot of it is comparing guys, sharing grips. There's so much of that out there. And then we're going to use the TrackMan a little bit more because we're really trying to fine tune and analyze, okay, was that a tighter slider? Was that a sweeper? Was that more of a curveball? You might think you're throwing a curveball, but it's actually more of a slider, which is fine, but we need to understand that and figure out how that's going to move so you can command it better and figure out what type of fastball might work best off of that. So there's a lot of different things that go into it at different levels, but we're going to, at the higher level, we're going to use a lot more tools than at the younger level is kind of just low level skill acquisition.
So at what age does a guy stop adding pitches to his arsenal?
Oh, I mean, there's guys who are, in their 20th year in the big leagues who are still adding pitches.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Or refining the pitch. sometimes you lose feel for a pitch throughout the season that you've been throwing your whole life, and for some reason you just can't throw it the same way anymore. Everyone's always looking to get better, and I think that's why the pitching world is so great, because I think pitchers like come together in a way that hitters haven't necessarily, and I hear hitters talk about this all the time, because it's like pitchers share so many ideas. We all get together and, oh, I learned this grip. Like, I'm going to show this to everyone. I'm not going to like gatekeep that really. Or we're going to talk about mechanics and all these different things, or how to attack a hitter. And I feel like hitters, there's like very much like different pockets of like this philosophy and this philosophy. And there's like a lot of headbutting, where pitchers, it's more like, I feel like very much like we're all together on things. So guys are always looking to get better. And if you start to see guys, maybe a younger guy throw a new pitch that's nasty, it's like, oh, how do you throw that? Like, I need to learn that, because that might be the thing for me.
Yeah, that's big. What pitches do you throw?
Currently, I mean, I'm not really pitching to guys too much, but in my career, I've thrown a lot of different pitches. I've thrown, four-seam fastball, and then I throw a sinker as well, and then I have a changeup. I have like a bigger sweeping slider, and then I have like a tighter, like call it like a gyro slider cutter type of hybrid. And I can throw like kind of a curveball, but it's more like a slurvy curve. I don't really throw that much anymore. But yeah, I've thrown a bunch of different pitches. The main pitches that I can't throw at all and never have been able to are like a real splitter and a knuckleball.
I think just going back to how you said the pitchers are like more of a unit, and then the hitters are like in their own boats. My theory is because there's like the feel versus real thing that's very prevalent in baseball, and you see it with high-level hitters like Alex Rodriguez saying this is how you swing, and he's swinging straight down to the tee. And then you see Barry Bonds teaching it the same way. It's just like, I feel where the barrel is, I just put it to the ball. Like, how do you analyze that? Like, that's not even anything to be analytical about, where I feel like the analytics go very heavy towards the pitching side. And I think you can see the TrackMan, the spin rate, and all these different things that could work. And I feel like pitchers just in general have a higher baseline IQ than most of the baseball hitters. Like, just from my experience of pitchers love to talk about other pitches. That's it. Hitters are just being like, dude, I just saw the ball and hit it. Like, that's it. Like, that's my feel. And there are definitely schools of thought that are very much gatekeepy, I guess. But I feel that's just, what's the only thing to track on a hit? It's just the launch angle and the exit velo. Like, you don't see, like, they're not tracking how much internal rotation they're getting in their backside and their scap load and how they snap, or what. It's like sometimes the best hitters just put the bat on the ball. Pitchers, though, have all these different arsenals of pitches. They have different movements, different windups and approaches, and different mindsets, and even how to get guys out. Like, do you think that has some validity to it?
Yeah, pitchers are always going to be, in control. They're the ones who are going to adapt first, and then hitters have to react to that. So pitchers are going to like innovate, and you see this with like pitching trends. Like a few years ago, everyone was throwing a sweeper more, right? Because hitters weren't used to that. So it's like everyone's throwing a sweeper. Now, like, a lot more guys were throwing like the gyro slider, and now it's going to be like a lot of guys throwing a splitter, because hitters start to adjust to a sweeper, right? Or they start to adjust to a gyro, right? So and then hitters react, and then pitchers have to find like a new way to get guys out. But yeah, that's just like the dynamic of baseball, and that's kind of how it always will be.
Talk a little bit about Shohei, because he's a little bit of a anomaly in terms of Major League Baseball. As someone that's able to hit at a high level as well as pitch at a high level, is that even worth shooting for guys that you see, like the two-way type of guys, or is it just like, all right, dude, you're a pitcher only, like, put the bat down, let's not even worry about it?
Yeah, I may have a little bit of a hot take on this. Obviously, I think Shohei's like the best of like both worlds. Like, he's one of the best hitters in the league. He's one of the best pitchers in the league. Arguably like the best hitter. I don't think he's like at Judge's level, but he's one of the best at both, obviously. I think that he has been like afforded he's been able to have the opportunity to do that. Like in Japan, like he was allowed to develop that way. And if you like heard his story, he wasn't necessarily, going to do that, but then he decided to stay in Japan, and they were like, one of the teams like proposed to him, like, do this, like try out both. And that kind of like, he was kind of sold on that, and it ended up like working out, but he went through that process there. I look at a guy like Hunter Green, who, is dominating pitching in the big leagues now, but he was drafted as a pitcher in the first round, but he was also like a first round talent as a shortstop, basically, and maybe a little bit lower level as a shortstop. But basically, I think the Reds gave him like 1 year as a position player, or like a 2A in minor league baseball. And then they're just like, you're just going to pitch. But I think a guy like that, if you give him the opportunities to do it, I think a guy like that could probably be a Shohei level player. And I think there's maybe not at the big league level, there's a lot less of those, but at the college level, I know I went to college and had the idea of like being a 2A, but on the first day they basically told me to choose one, and I chose pitching. And I don't think I would have like hit, past college, but I think I would have had the potential to at some point be like a contributor hitting on our college team. But you start to see that at like so many different levels, and I think we steer guys into like one direction a little too early for some guys, and a lot of times they just need the opportunity to, do both at a high level.
I agree completely. I mean, I've made a post before about labeling a 14-year-old kid as a PO is a terrible thing to do. Like, you're completely shutting off their full athletic development, and then that's kind of where the stigma comes, where like the pitchers aren't athletes. I think it's from a sense of coaches not giving pitchers an opportunity to showcase their athleticism. So I was wondering if just Shohei's success could maybe potentially trickle down and open up a little bit more opportunities for these guys that are high-level athletes that can hit, but coaches really early on, like what you were saying, just stunt their growth athletically to just fully focus on just throwing the ball.
Yeah, and I hope it does give some more opportunities, and have coaches give a second look, or organizations give a second look to guys doing both. But I'll also look at the other side and say potentially someone like Hunter Green, maybe he wouldn't be as good of a pitcher if they had him do both. There's not necessarily a way of knowing, but I definitely would like to see some guys who have that amount of talent get the opportunity to do both. And it's a lot of work, obviously. Like Shohei puts in obviously a ton of work on both ends, and not everyone has necessarily like the time or the dedication to do that. But I think a lot more guys could get like close to that if we just let it happen.
Did you ever have pitchers batting practice after you guys shut out somebody?
I've been at like some programs and some teams where we've seemed to like avoid that. But in college, occasionally we would kind of do some like scrimmage stuff, and like you start to see like how some of these pitchers can hit, and like people are surprised, and it's like, well, these guys were probably the best hitters on their high school team, but then they got to college and they were told like, do this thing. But even in pro ball, I've seen some guys who were, power hitters on their high school team. I played with a guy in pro ball and I think in college summer ball, and he was a pitcher, but he had set like a home run record in Texas, and like he was a pitcher in college, and it's like that guy's an unbelievable hitter, but maybe didn't have the opportunity to hit at the next level.
Yeah, that's what's always mind-blowing to me, is just because like the higher up you go, the more athletic they are by nature. Like you see in NBA all the time, like the 12th man on the bench was putting up 50 in high school. Like they could score, but your roles change and how you're used for on the team is changing. But I think that might come from just a coach's perspective on how they see a certain athlete. But I think it's important for anyone, regardless of what your position is that your coach tells you, is just be ready for anything. Like, that's just the full athlete approach and not looking at it as just being a pitcher only.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think baseball is one of the best sports for that, because if you look at baseball, it's like, all right, you're going to have to sprint, you're going to have good agility. Like, and this is if you're doing both, like pitching and hitting. You're going to have to be able to field the ball, you're going to have to throw the ball, you're going to have to hit the ball. Like, that's so many different skills versus, maybe it's basketball or football, where it's like basketball. All right, you're going to have to run, you're going to have to move, and you're going to have to, like, shoot. Right. So, like, but I think, like, baseball with, like, you have that agility piece, the speed piece, but you also have, like, the rotational piece, the throwing piece. It's, if you're doing both of those things, baseball covers a lot of what other sports do.
Yeah. And actually, something that Josh had brought up to me that kind of made me start thinking about things a little bit different was how he just said that in the physical therapy realm, the field is evolving. And he just said, and, with taking that, all of our fields are evolving. And you see how javelin is evolving as an industry, and you see baseball is evolving as an industry or as a sport. And I think that a big thing is Shohei and Yamamoto's success is bringing into light a different way of doing things. Yamamoto with the mobility and the turbo javelin, and then Shohei with being a two-way. And you obviously see now how fast pitchers are pitching and the development, and just even, Heenan posts about the size chart all the time, like how, every position is basically 6 foot, 200 pounds or more, even at like the inner shortstop and or middle infield positions. And you just see that, the sport is evolving, the coaching is evolving, the technology is evolving. Even looking at what's the thing, ABS, automatic balls and strikes thing. It's like, that's a huge revolution now. Just so many different things are evolving. Even like the TrackMan that you guys use to track the spin rate and the velocity and all that stuff is just, there's so many different things that are evolving. That's really cool to see kind of unfold before our very eyes. So where do you think that, just to wrap this up, where do you think that baseball has done a really good job of evolving, and where do you think it could do better?
Yeah, I think pitchers have, like I mentioned, pushing each other to always get better is something that I think pitchers will continue to do. I think hitters are like kind of getting there, but pitchers are definitely like leading the way. And I think there's some better tools for pitching. TrackMan has absolutely been a game changer for learning pitches. I think the strength and conditioning side has been super, super important. If you look at the progressions of that, it started out where like baseball players didn't lift, and then they didn't do any upper body. And then, you were kind of lifting like a football player. And now it's starting to move into, like more functional lifting. And then I think the mobility side is going to start to play a big role in that. Potentially like higher reps and, explosiveness. There's going to be, a continual like shift and drive for getting better. And I think, baseball's done a great job there. In terms of where we do better, I think MLB organizations, because that's the highest level of the game, I think they need to continue to do better. I think they need to pay their coaches better. The reason that you look at MLB players and minor leaguers, and in the off season they're going to a facility to train, is because probably a lot of and they're paying a decent amount of money to do that. A lot of the higher paid and smarter and innovative minds in baseball are in the private sector, because MLB organizations do not pay well. And I think if teams, you look at the Dodgers, like paying guys a little bit more, they have some like unbelievable minds there because they're able to keep those guys there. But if, you don't pay these guys their value, then, and they have to support themselves and support a family, then they're going to go to the private sector where they can, get paid their value a lot more. And that's a simple business thing that I think if MLB teams, like certain MLB teams like the Dodgers, who invest more into like player development, nutrition, housing, into their coaches, those are like super low hanging fruit that if you just do those things, it's going to be fairly low cost in the long run, and the returns are going to be crazy high. A lot of the problem with pro sports in general is there's certain owners who really are looking at like the bottom line so much. And I get it is a business, but if you're being like very stingy on that bottom line and that revenue sharing is going to bring money in for your team, then you're not going to put a good product on the field. You're going to pay the bare minimum in salary. You're not going to do a ton of work for developing your players. You're not going to go get guys in free agency. And then, you're going to put a poor team out on the field, and, your fans are going to probably hate you, and you're not going to have a good team, but that you're guaranteed money because revenue sharing and TV deals and sponsorships. And I think that's something that is going to be a big piece. Hopefully the Dodgers having success there. And obviously they have a lot of money to spend, but they have owners who are willing to do that. And, I really wish that more owners would push for that.
Yeah, I mean, I know going back to Josh real quick, but he posted about Ndamukong Suh and how he was in the NFL for 13 years and how he didn't have a single injury. And he accredited that to his off-field team that he had. He had a team of a nutritionist, he had a chef, he had a physical therapist, he had a strength coach, he had a speed coach, all these people that were working with him, and that was all private. And he said that it was basically like a lot of the other players that said that they couldn't afford all of that. They were the ones that were essentially not making as much progress, or they did get hurt. And then you talk about LeBron James. He's been quoted to spend like $1 million a year on his body. And you look at him, they call him longevity now, right? Because it's like he's playing until he's in his 40s in basketball. Tom Brady did the same thing, playing into his 40s in football. And he had this, basically a masseuse that was working with him on creating this whole optimization style routine of low inflammation diet and pliability routine that he could do every single day to make sure that he was really malleable and pliable, and when he got hit, he didn't take as much of the impact as the other players. But those are all guys that are at the top of their game and went outside of their pro organization to get those needs. And you almost wonder, all right, why are the pro organizations not having that in-house for all the players to be able to have? And I think it goes back to even what Brett and I talk a lot about with the collegiate strength and conditioning side of things as well. I believe they're in the same boat, very underpaid and overworked on the athletic training staff, the strength coach staff, and the sport coach staff. And I think that it's because a lot of these people end up taking those jobs because of the name of the organization or of the school, and eventually you end up getting burnt out, and then you end up in the private sector.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. They know, these organizations know that, they can, in a way, pay less, take advantage of some of these people because of the name associated with it. And it's like, oh, that's cool to work in professional baseball. And it's like, yeah, of course it is. But, eventually, if you're not paying people the right way, money and business is going to be a big driver of what you're able to do. And if you're not investing in your business, in your people, then at a certain point they're going to leave and new people will come in. Yeah, but they may not be nearly at the level of, the people that you just lost. I talking to a lot of pro guys, it's unfortunate, but I know even in season, there's a lot of people who are going out of the organization, to a private, whether that's like therapist, strength place, nutritionist, whatever it might be. They're going outside of their organization to find these resources because their team is not, and their organization is not providing it. And then, which is fine, but then what's frustrating is like the team will be like, if they found that out, you know, there can be repercussions for that, or the team will get a little butthurt. And it's like, well, if you're not going to provide the highest level of resources for the highest level of athlete, then what do you expect to happen, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I completely get it. When I was in college, after my Tommy John surgery, I went and found my own physical therapy place because I didn't want any, even this was after like the whole post-op protocol, when I just needed maintenance on like my hip and my back and my shoulder and my elbow. But like I went off outside of the facility and I went to a private place. And then the same thing with my coach. I hired a private coach because I wanted more than what the track team had to offer. So, I mean, you just see that over and over again. And, you know, I think that's part of progressing the sport, like you said, and hopefully we can get there one day. But Luke, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Happy to be here and appreciate it, guys.
Thanks for tuning in.
And if you enjoyed it, please leave a 5-star rating and review and share the show, because the only way that this show grows is if you like it, share it, and tell your friends and family about it.
New episode every Monday.